It's the middle of the night. I can't sleep. I woke up. I got this idea going through my head, and I just really wanted to record a video and share it. Um, I believe that it will be helpful to language learners, and I'll get to the more helpful stuff at the end. I'm going to talk about more theoretical stuff at the beginning. I'm not sure if this is where the not rigorous part comes in. I'm not sure if it's, I have a thought, right? So I'm going to share my thought, but I haven't sat there and worked it out forever, so I could change my mind in the future about this part of it, but I want to share it anyway. So, um, the Chomskyan grammar, right? If you're not familiar with it at all, this is not going to be anywhere like deep or accurate, because this is me not being able to sleep at night, just waking up, going over this, and this isn't something that I think about every day, but we have you have a sentence, right? And I may parse this wrong. Again, I apologize. This isn't the point of the video, but the dog eats pizza. And then in the Chomskyan world, you have universal grammar, and that breaks all this into these different kinds of phrases. So this thing right here would be, this is, I don't remember the labels. I think these two together, the dog is going to be noun phrase. This is going to be like the noun, the header or something, the head of the noun or something like that. This is article, whatever you call that, modifier. I think it's called noun modifier. And then together these make noun phrase. And then I think over here, this is a noun phrase again. Somewhere direct, they don't call it direct object, but I'm going to call it direct object because, like I said, I'm going off rough memory of a diagram here. This is a verb, right? Together these make a verb phrase, and then together the noun phrase and the verb phrase make a sentence. So anyway, even though I know that looks really rough and that is not accurate, if you know Chomsky grammar, you can correct my sentence there. But the point is, what I want to show isn't the fact that I screwed up all those terms, but the fact that you're building these branches, right? And the branches get really complex, and there's a lot of good evidence in the book that I am familiar with, The Language Instinct, about why this is a good way to model reality and why grammar works this way and nouns fit into these patterns, right? Okay, and that's about all I want to say about that. And hopefully, hopefully you can maybe after the video go look up Chomsky grammar and universal grammar if you're not familiar with it and kind of get a better explanation of that. That's as good as I'm going to get right now. I actually think it's probably more accurate to say that in a sense grammar doesn't exist, like as if it exists somewhere on its own, and that grammar is a natural construct that grows out of the meanings of words. I feel pretty comfortable saying that statement even without these full details of, Chomsky grammar, universal grammar is the correct term there, or this other theory that I don't even know the name of. And the reason is based on my many years of language study. And when you're learning, like when I'm learning the word, they give you the root word luo is how they pronounce it if you're using the Rasmian, Leo if you're using modern, and luo with the pronunciation I like to use when I study now. But anyway, that word, right, it has this regular conjugation, which I can't rattle off the top of my head. And you don't really need to memorize that word with each form as a distinct word. You just need to memorize the base word and the pattern because the number of patterns in Greek are kind of small and, comparatively, they're kind of small and they're also pretty regular. So you can kind of just memorize a pattern. Now, this is really important because even though I say that, your brain's not doing that. So when you think you're memorizing the pattern, you're not. And that's going to be really important when I get to the useful takeaway at the end. And it's really struck me with my study of Russian, because in Russian, when you learn it from a textbook, they tell you their patterns. The patterns, and that's the reason. I honestly think that's the real reason. Everybody who studies Russian complains about Russian grammar. It's so challenging. I think the reason that it's actually challenging is because there's not like a set pattern that you follow 90% of the time and then 10% of random exceptions. It's more like the biggest pattern is used, I don't know, 40% of the time, 60% of the time, and then there's another pattern that's used 30% of the time, maybe another pattern that's used 20% of the time. And so the exceptions are almost as common as the rule. For Russian, maybe knowing the pattern, like I said, helps. But at the end of the day, I'm not learning a pattern, I'm learning a word. And I'm going to start my diagram, but I have a little bit more that I want to say before I fully get into it. Let's make sure, where can I draw this at? I'll draw this right here. So let's say we have this word, right? This whole thing represents like a word, like the abstract concept of a word and everything that word represents. What's key here, we often think of words, we think of meaning. All right, meaning. But it's not just meaning, it's also usage. And that trips up a lot of foreign language learners who don't catch this, because there's no such thing as a meaning. A meaning, like a word, is not a meaning. A meaning does not have a word. A word is both meaning and usage together. And this usage part is the part that turns into grammar. When we pit a bunch of usage rules together that are tied to individual words, that's how grammar grows out of it. So again, that part's not super rigorous in my head right now, but for sure this part is pretty rigorous. Otherwise, the Russian language doesn't work if this isn't true. Um, Now, another little caveat, the other piece that makes this idea seem more reasonable to me. So, large language models are extremely effective and interesting, and I have a disagreement with people that, again, it would be a tangent, so I'm not going to rant on it here, but people love to say that large language models just predict the next word. I think that's nonsense. Um, they also like to say that there's no understanding, they're just parrots. That's also nonsense, and I don't actually hear that as much now with the newer chatbots. Um, so with the older chatbots, the first ones that were really cool, they do this thing called word vectorization. And basically what happens is they take, hundreds of thousands of words, and they put them in a multi-dimensional vector space, and that space represents the axes represent different things. So the most I can draw is 3, right? Because we're humans and this is 2D space, so the most I can draw is 3D space. But we have like one axis might be a part of meaning, another axis might be like one axis might be how much the word is feminine versus masculine in meaning. One axis might be whether it's a proper noun or not a proper noun. One axis might be whether it's a verb or not a verb. One axis might be, I don't know, whatever kind of rule you could think of. Can it come at the start of the sentence or the end of a sentence? One word might be the conjugation pattern that it follows. One axis, I mean. So you have all these different axes, and what's really cool is when you put all these words into these axes that are sort of based off of characteristics of words, um, the space between the words starts to represent reality between the concepts. So let's see if I remember how to do this right. So if it was like if you took the word like king and all of its semantic stuff that it statistically put it in this vector space based on the text that it pulls from, right? And then you take queen, if you were to subtract the distance between these 2 points, you would find the same distance between the 2 points, man and woman, for example, right? Or male and female, or whatever. Um, so that's very cool. What's very interesting then too, as you probably noticed pretty easily from chatbots, it's kind of hard because when I say this, I'm not talking about the latest model, ChatGPT 5. I don't know about the differences between GPT-3, which I believe is what the book that I read that was very detailed was based on, versus like ChatGPT 5. So there's probably a lot more bells and whistles going on in there. But basically, I'm not going to spend a lot of time trying to prove it, but to me, this is the meaning of words. This is grasping the meaning of words. And if you've ever spent some time speaking with ChatGPT, you'll notice that people don't really complain about it being ungrammatical, right? It's usually able to speak like English, right? It can speak English, even though it says nonsense sometimes, even though maybe it's not the best at answering math questions. The newer ones are getting better, but based on this technology right here as the core of it, where the understanding happens inside of it, um, yeah. Anyway, so this also led me to stands as further evidence to me that the grammar is growing out of the meanings of words because there's no grammar in this thing. Works. Anyway, so that's about all I want to do on that little rant. But those are the last couple of asides that I wanted to get that I just really wanted to talk about. So now for language learning, let's talk a little bit about language learning and what it means to study a language based on different things I've learned as a language learner. Some of which I tried to cover with my nonsense theories that I didn't connect together. But here's what it really means to learn a language, right? You'll hear just absolute nonsense statistics on the internet all the time, like, oh, with 2,000 words you'll be, whatever in English, you can use English or whatever, or 10,000 words and you'll be college level master of the language. Like those are actual statistics that I've come across. So the amount of words that you need to do anything, even the simplest tasks, would be way more than 2,000. It's another, just trust me, bro. 2,000 words, you can't do hardly anything with 2,000 words. It's practically useless. You try to form any sentences you want. If you only know 2,000 words, it won't take you, like if you just sit there and try to stream of conscious speak, every couple seconds you're going to come across something you didn't know how to say, right? It doesn't matter what you're talking about. And this 10,000 words, even 20,000 words, is also nonsense. You cannot, if you only know 20,000 words, you can't read a novel, right? You just can't. You won't be able to. And that's true even if there's only 20,000 words in the novel, because you will not know the 20,000 words that are in the novel. You will know a set of 20,000 words, and then there's the set of 20,000 words in the novel. They just won't overlap. So, yeah, so the number of words you need to learn is really high. So, language learning. Let's talk about language learning. What is language learning? 99% of language learning is vocabulary. This is true because the amount of words you need, which I really didn't prove out, that's a really hard, trust me, bro, the way I presented it. Um, anyway, the amount of words that you need is very high. So that's one reason. Another reason is, as I was trying to demonstrate, and hopefully I demonstrated a little bit, enough that you'll consider it worth researching more in depth, is this notion that grammar actually grows out of the meaning of words. So, right, so if we see this in a sentence, if we just hear the word phone, our brain has to decide, well, is it the noun phone or is it the verb meaning of phone? And basically, we just pick one. If the two meanings are pretty common, and for whatever reason our brain decides they're both equally likely to be the archetype or prototype, I think archetype's a better name for it. If they're both equally likely to be the archetype, then we kind of randomly pick. And if you statistically picked 1,000, 200,000 native English speakers, it would be a 50-50 chance which one they picked. In this case, based on the fact that noun is the only one that jumped into my head at first, and I had to think for a couple minutes to realize, oh yeah, it's a verb too. Probably, I'm assuming that's true for native speakers in general. And probably if you put this word in front of, 200,000 native English speakers, some much higher percentage of the time they would come up with the noun meaning instead of the verb meaning. I don't know, 80%, 90%, 95%. Some of the times they might come up with the verb meaning, but much more likely they're going to come up with the noun meaning. And So hopefully that was clear. The brain works on statistics, especially when it comes to language. It is a statistical machine when it comes to language processing. So when we hear a word, when we hear a string of sounds, right, in a foreign language, the first thing we have to do is break it up. Our brain, as a new language learner, this part's really hard actually. We have to learn to break it up into the different chunks, the different separate chunks. I would say words, but I don't want to say words yet because I'm going to use word to mean something different in a second, so it'll be confusing. You could say words, right? If I say the dog eat pizza and I'm not a native English speaker, I have to say, okay, wait, the dog. Oh, that's two sounds, like the dog. Two words, but I don't want to call them words just yet. So, because first, before our brain even thinks about the concept of word, we have to break them into where the sound divisions happen in a sentence, the concept divisions or whatever. Then after that, we pull out this one phone, and now we have to put it in a word category, right? Is it the word phone that's a noun, or is it the word phone? I'm almost behind my camera. Is it the word phone that's the verb? And we use the rest of the sentence to fill that in, right? Hopefully that was clear. I'm trying to demonstrate that before we even get to the word part, which is what I want to focus on, we also have to do a part where our brain breaks apart the sounds into the separations, the meaning separations. So there are a lot of things you can do for that. Listening is, of course, key for that part of language learning. This isn't where the bulk of your time will spend because after you get enough words under your belt, this part becomes kind of easier. But in the beginning, this is really daunting. And another thing you can do is listen and try to write out what they say, even if you don't understand it. And in the early stages, you're going to get that wrong sometime. But the more you do it, the more you'll get it right. And the more you do this piece over here, focus on the word, the meaning of the word, the more that this part about splitting it up will become easier as well. Now, what I really wanted to talk about again, sorry, this is kind of I'm a long intro kind of person. It's just how I am. But the meaning of the word, what does it mean to know a word? This is also something that really struck me as a language learner. You don't know a word. There's no such thing as knowing a word is not a binary thing. You don't know a word or not know a word. It's not binary. It's a scale. And that's really where the key of what I want to focus on. So at the bottom will be words that I know. So right. So if we split this into categories, I'm just going to randomly draw lines. I don't know how many I'm going to do yet. It's a little bit arbitrary. The point of this is not to have the correct amount of divisions, but to say that the divisions exist. So at the bottom is I know the pronunciation of a word. Okay. So, and this really comes first. The very first thing you start to pick up when you learn a new word is the sound. So honestly, the first step towards knowing a word is so that I know that there is some sound that has meaning in the language English that goes pizza, pizza, right? So that's the first layer of meaning. And if you want to talk about the very first step, if you consider just the very first step knowing a word, now you know the word pizza. You know that there is a sound in English that carries semantic meaning that sounds like this, pizza. At its core, pronunciation is like the first thing you learn when you learn a word is what the word sounds like. Along with that is spelling, but I'm going to focus on pronunciation. It's more important than spelling, but spelling you could kind of fit spelling here or spelling in like a hyphenated category. Maybe you could fit spelling right above it. I'm just going to consider spelling part of pronunciation for this discussion. It's not a big deal. The point, like I said, isn't that the chart's perfect. The point is that the chart exists, right? Yeah, so pronunciation, pizza. The next layer, I would say probably what I would put next is grammar. But when I say grammar, what I really mean is usage. And let's go even different. Part of speech usage, right? And I want to spell that out because grammar has such a different meaning. You may not be, it could mean this, but you're probably not thinking this if I say grammar. And this is really what I mean. Part of speech usage. So pizza, it behaves like a noun. So it does things that nouns do. Pizza can be singular and plural. It can be pizza, it can be pizzas. Um, Pizza can take the article the pizza, a pizza, right? Um, Pizza, two pizzas, three pizzas. And you think, why are you saying all that? That's so basic. Well, trust me, if you're studying Russian, every one of those things I said would be something you might have to learn about the word pizza. So that's where grammar, I think now at this point, hopefully that starts to make it a little clearer how grammar builds out of words. Um, it'd be a lot more clear if I could use examples from Russian, but when the fact that pizza and pizzas, um, there's no rule that says add an S to pizza. You memorize the fact that pizzas is the plural of pizza, that pizzas means more than one pizza. You memorize that as a part of the word. That's what your brain does, and that becomes really obvious when you study a language like Russian, where you kind of have to do that because the grammar is just not consistent. it, I'm sure a Russian grammarian will try to disagree with that, but I think that if we really hashed it out, we could come to an understanding and agreement on what I'm trying to say there. So, so part of speech usage, pizza, pizzas, you have to learn both of those things separately. So you are learning, when you learn the word pizza, you're learning that pizzas and pizza have the same semantic meaning. They point to the same concept, but this word, this concept, grammatically fits into these two different types of usage, right? So that's what's happening is you're when you're learning the grammar, your brain is building out the different ways to use the word, and it's important that I right here at this level I want to say part of speech usage. So there's another thing, um, when we study a word, and this really isn't just a linear pyramid. It's not like, I mean, pronunciation pretty much has to be at the bottom, but these other ones kind of get filled in. It would probably be more like a base with like a bunch of different bars on top. And then the bars can either be higher or lower depending on your depth of understanding of that specific bar. I would say that this is more fair. So at the base, you have pronunciation. One of these is going to be semantic meaning, which is what I wanted to mention next. One would be like part of speech usage. One would be usage within the realm of semantics. And anyway, there's other ones too. But um, so another one of these would be for sure semantic, semantic meaning, semantic range. And then what I mean by this is, let's say we have this dog, and I'm not going to sit here and try to draw a dog right now, but like we have this base core concept idea of dog, right? And I show you hundreds of pictures of dogs, and you'd be like, oh, yep, that's a dog, that's a dog, that's a dog, that's a dog. And then I start to show you pictures of like, a wolf, and you're like, well, is a wolf a dog? And well, kind of a wolf's a dog, kind of a wolf's not a dog. It depends on the context, right? It depends on the specific question being asked, to whether you want to call a wolf a dog or not. I mean, sure, a wolf is not a dog, but can you sometimes replace the word wolf with dog? Yeah, and there's a lot of semantic overlap. Um, so that's kind of what I want to say by semantic range. This is what I would actually call at its core meaning, and this is the beautiful thing that word vectorization is doing. Anyways, so this comes really key when you start to see words that a lot of words have the same meaning. Things that we consider synonyms, a lot of them will have the same meaning. And this is something that foreigners mess up a lot. So two words will have the same meaning, meaning that they point to almost exactly the same objects all the time. Like when does a wolf point to the same object as a dog? Often, but not always. but you might have two words that almost always, like 99% overlap as far as they both would be pointing to the exact same concept, but the setting can also matter. One can be used in a certain setting, like one is only used in an academic setting, or one is almost always only used in a religious setting, or one is almost always only used with like close friends, and this, so they can have these like there's probably a word for that actually in linguistics that I don't know. Maybe that's what like social. I don't know, but hopefully I described the concept clear enough. I'm gonna put a question mark there because I don't know what to call that box. Uh, Maybe what the word register means. I don't know. I'm just gonna leave it a question mark for now. But what I really want to say then is, so when you learn a word, let's get back to that because that's where this really comes into play. What does it mean to learn a word? And what this pyramid was supposed to be. So I don't know about all these layers being correct. Like I said, maybe they're not supposed to be layers. They should be layers to an extent, but as you learn a word, you build these layers of complexity of understanding of the meaning of a word. The base layer, whatever's the most core, the simplest to understand, the first thing you would learn. If you take all the vocabulary that you know in any language, your native language, a foreign language, the majority of your words will be at that lowest base level. Then there'll be a group that's at a slightly higher level, a group that's at a slightly higher level. And it's not really a stacking, it's more like a growing, branching out type of deal that's harder to visualize. So when I learn a word, right, my first step, I learn the sound of the word. Then at some point, I learn some of the semantic meaning of the word. Then I start to learn some of the semantic ranges of the word. What for sure is or isn't a pizza, in that language. What does this count as a pizza? Does that count as a pizza? And I start to learn some of the edge cases. Or, that doesn't necessarily have to be the next step. Maybe the next step is I start to learn some of the usage stuff. Well, okay, so this is a noun, so this fits in a sentence where nouns usually fit in. And, that this is how it conjugates, or this is part of how it conjugates. And later on, I learned some more about how it might conjugate. Parts of it you learn early, and some parts of it you learn later. So some parts, when you learn a foreign language, a lot of times they want you to memorize all these grammatical parsing trees, when actually what you're really learning is words, and you don't learn every single thing about the word up front. You learn it in pieces, you learn it in stages. And I also think that that's what's really key about language learning in the long term. And that's what's really hard to say about when people say, well, did you understand that? Did you not understand that? It doesn't work that way, right? So I understand in layers. So it's pretty easy for me to say when I come across something in Russian, read it, listen to it, whatever. And if someone asks me or I ask myself, did I understand it? I can usually say, well, I didn't not understand it at all, right? I understood it some, but I can also almost always say I didn't understand it as well as I understand stuff in my native language. There's some smaller texts or smaller things that I could feel like I do understand as well as in my native language, but most of the stuff I come across, I do not feel that I understand as well as my native language, even after all these years of study. But it's not because of it's because of the way that language learning works, right? I'm taking these words, I'm first learning something that's almost useless, just the sound of the word. You can't do very much with that, but that's the first step. So when I feel like it's not that I understood nothing, it's because, well, I mean, I recognize those sounds. I recognize those as words, as word divisions or whatever. And that's not nothing. That's something. That's the first step that has to be done. But then and the part of what I wanted to get at too was people like to talk about active and passive vocabulary, and that's super important, super useful. But it's not true. It's not a binary thing. There's no active and versus passive. This pyramid that I'm trying to build, that's really part of what I want to try to demonstrate there. It's not just is this word active vocabulary versus passive vocabulary. It's how many of the different facets that exist in a word do I have a good grasp of in this specific word, right? So that's really my main thing. And I hope that was clear. And I hope it was clear how that's helpful, because I think that when we learn language, 99% of what we're doing is learning words. But what happens is learning words is a lot different than what we initially think. It's not binary. It's not you know a word or you don't know a word. And there's a lot more to a word than just the word's meaning. There's a lot of different pieces about usage. There's pieces about pronunciation. There's pieces about form change. And then meaning itself includes some different categories, such as the range, the edge cases. Um, and really, you're fitting the word in relation to other words. The key isn't that I understand what yechid means. It's that I understand how these like many different concepts relate to each other, and how their different semantic, like Venn diagrams, overlap with one another. And that's really what you're doing. So you're kind of learning the fuller sense of a single word and the many different meanings and ways of using. And you learn that over time. There's no reason to pick one word and try to drill down super deep on one word at a time. That actually would be counterproductive. It's as you grow and learn, you have the whole set of, I would say 40,000 words that you know, right? Because I think that the estimates are way low. And you have a huge percentage of them that you know at a very small level. Maybe you literally just recognize them as words. You can be like, I've heard that somewhere before, but you have no idea what it means. You almost certainly don't know how to use it. Unless it's a really predictable language, you may already know how to use it because you can kind of tell that that's a noun and that all nouns of that type follow this one kind of pattern. So you may even have a little more information. In Russian, you don't usually have that information because they're not very predictable in that way. But you may have some of that information, but you don't have much. And then you have another group of words that you know a little better, right? You understand some more, a more refined, uh, more you have more refined boundaries, more accurate boundaries about the semantic range and the meaning. You have more usage. There's more usages that you know, right? Um, that's easier to say again in Russian than in English because of the grammar is just so different. But it does apply in English as well. It does even apply in simpler languages with simpler grammar. Um, so then you have another set that you basically fluent in that word, right? You know that word pretty much as well as a native speaker. You know it inside and out. You know like all the different ways to use it, all the different forms, all the different uh, whatever. And you know, like you can't just know a word in isolation. So like for that word that I'm saying you know really, really well, you also have enough grasp of the relevant synonyms and probably relevant antonyms that you understand how this word fits within the context of those other related words. Okay. And so what happens when you learn a language isn't that, well, it's almost all vocabulary learning, but it's not a binary thing. It's this process of moving things from knowing a word a tiny bit to knowing a word deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper. And then at the deepest level, the word's not in isolation, it's the word in relation to other relevant words, right? And maybe those other relevant words are not at the deepest level. They don't necessarily have to be, but the one at the deepest level would have to be, those other ones would have to be known to a certain enough high enough level to keep that one in the deepest level, if that makes sense. So hopefully that's clear, and hopefully I think that really explains the entire process of language learning. Just again to reiterate the point that I think is practical and that's useful and that's helpful. Um, when I'm sitting down to learn a language, right? First, I have to learn the sounds of the language. I have to learn words. I have to learn when I hear this huge string of sounds, probably a sentence or a paragraph, where to split up the meanings. Okay. Then I have to learn what I can do with those different chunks that I have discovered. And you don't learn The language process is a process of relearning, right? So, or of digging deeper. So in the beginning stage, I learn a bunch of words to a very small level. Then as I'm learning, I start to take the words at the small level and move them to a slightly deeper level in all of these different facets, while I also bring up new words to a small level. Then I take my deepest words and I start to bring them a little deeper. I bring my level lower than that words up a little bit, and then I bring some new words up to this lowest level. And you just kind of keep growing this whole thing.